Excellent. Okay, so we've got a couple of different topics we're going to cover today, but I think the way I'd like to kick this off is starting with you, Kelvin. You work in a small cross-functional team, the growth team. Can you tell us a bit about that team, what it does at Tanda, and just give us an overview?
So the growth team's responsibility is to help prospective customers become happy paying customers with Tanda. So we focus on the parts of the product and the touch points where customers are having their first interactions with Tanda and the product itself. So we look at things like sign-up flows, marketing, ads, things like that, and just help customers be aware of what Tanda can do and how it can help them provide the value. The team is made up of myself. We have a product manager, Brod. We have a business analyst, is Alan, and June, a developer. So we have different specialities, but a lot of crossover with our skills, which definitely helps when we're trying to solve a problem really quickly. Just because we can all get across something and use those, cherry pick those skills and use them in conjunction to come to a solution.
So working in a small team there, Kelvin, sounds like a small team. Can you talk about how frequently you're measuring the data and the outcomes and the output, and how often you're measuring your impact?
So we use data a lot in terms of how we measure our success. And in terms of one of the things we use to get to a point where we actually have an outcome that we measure is we have a structured process to come to solving a problem and find the solution. So we use sprints in our team, and that is in itself specifically designed for smaller teams. So you can start in a week, know the problem, and then at the end of the week of the 5 days, have something tested so you can see whether you're on the right track or not. Yeah.
Sure. So on that theme of measuring what you're doing, measuring your workflow and things like that, maybe Merlin, you'd like to jump in and maybe you'd like to tell us a little bit about, in your experience, how important it is for teams of different sizes to be able to measure their outcomes and their outputs.
Yeah, look, I guess for me at least, it sort of I sort of came to this whole topic of teams primarily because of my interest in how organizations grow and how we retain this element of excellence that allowed organizations to grow. Part and parcel of that is this idea of needing to cut cognitive load within organizations, and teams sort of form a bedrock of that. How you measure that, I think needs to be sort of customized by what is important with regards to the organization as they're growing. I don't necessarily think that there's a one-stop shop formula for it, but I think the main guideline of it is that what is it that you're achieving or trying to achieve within the guise of maintaining excellence, let's say, and I define that by creating an environment where staff do the right thing when no one's watching. You're looking at sort of, within a community sector context, where I came from prior to my present job right now, we'd measure it based on things like them showing up on time, for example, which is really key, because if you had a client that's waiting for a carer to show up, if they don't show up on time, that's not going to happen. That's going to look quite bad on your organization. So we have matrices along those lines, and that's generally quite standard. But I think it's how you structure the organization in a way that teams can function and calibrate them to the right size. So that's it.
And maybe you'd like to touch on also how that calibration of teams might change as the organization grows in size, and also what happens in an organization that's trying to innovate that all of a sudden very quickly needs to change its objective because it's innovating. Do you have any thoughts on that?
There was a study that's done by this bloke named Bradley Stats, and he did a bit of an experiment. So he had two groups. One was made up of a group of 2 people. The other one was made up of a group of 4 people. And what he got them to do was to solve a 50-piece Lego puzzle. And it was really interesting because the group of 4 ended up solving the Lego puzzle faster than the group of 2. So the group of 4 did it in, I think, 28 minutes. The group of 2 did it in about 36 minutes. But then when you look at labor efficiencies, it's really quite interesting. So you take 28 minutes divided by 4, you get 112 minutes. With the group of 2, you get, 72 minutes or something like that. So all of a sudden what you see is that although the group of 4 solve the puzzle quicker, on the whole, they actually lost 40 minutes of the organization's time, theoretically speaking. So it's an interesting one. There's a guy who's really quite well known, was doing research in groups, and he said the ideal group size is 4 to 6. So within that threshold, it depends on how you want to sort of calibrate it. But what happens is that, from 9 people onwards within the group, you start having to deal more so with people issues rather than performance or implementing. There's the Brad Smith, the CEO of Intuit, so the financial services company, the IT company. He's got a rule. It's called a 2 pizza rule. And one of the things about that is that no group should be or can be within Intuit larger than what 2 pizzas can feed. And that's something that sort of stays the course. So I think the emphasis is towards smaller groups rather than bigger groups. Even within a bigger organization, you could always break up the projects into smaller groups. You look at the military, for example. Since World War II, combat teams are made up of no bigger than 4. They used to be originally 12, but it was just not manageable. So when you're in an environment of high performance, when you're in an environment where you need to work fast, strict deadlines, the emphasis towards smaller groups rather than bigger groups.
Absolutely. Just a bit of a quip on that. Someone made the joke at Tanda the other day. They have the 2 pizza rule at Intuit and at Amazon, and we sort of have an iteration of that, which is like the 1 carton of beer rule. That like no team should be able to drink an entire carton of beer and then drive home legally. But anyway, on that theme, Bridget, so you work in a small team, and your team's had a few cartons of beer, I'm sure. But you work alongside another small team, which has similar but sometimes slightly different objectives. How do you find having those 2 small teams interacting and making sure you're working on the same things, working the same goals?
With that one, so we work very closely with the sales team. I think like the best way that we manage it is by communicating. So making sure that we're both understanding the customer, their needs, what they're sort of wanting in the product. Often we will have like conversations surrounding the implementation, trying to just make sure that we are going to follow exactly what they want.
So let's talk about when we work in these smaller teams, you're going to naturally build a closer relationship with your colleagues. You're going to get to know them, you're going to be friends, you might have a beer on Friday. Can we talk about some of the upsides of that, and then maybe the downsides of that, and anyone who wants to jump in?
I think definitely one of the upsides is as you build those personal relationships and you know your colleagues more, it can be easier to be more candid. And that definitely helps in, places where you need to move fast and learn and fail and repeat, and move forward. Something, I've noticed personally is you're the average of the 5 people that you're around the most is the saying. And I've noticed that, you start to draw on the skills other people have, but also sometimes the way they think. So I've caught myself out thinking, okay, I'm just going to, if I have a problem or something I need to work out, and I'll think that I'll know, say, the opinion of someone else in my team. And maybe I'll just make that unconsciously and then go ahead and do it. But in reality, that's not always the case. Like, you should always have it, if you're working on a problem, be structured about how you go about these things and make sure that you're open and not just assuming how other people on your team think, because that might not be always the case.
Right, so we'll come back to that for you guys. But Kelvin, I want to throw a hypothetical at you. You work in a small, highly engaged, productive team. What do you think would happen to that team if we did what Merlin was talking about before, throwing more people at the problem with the Lego puzzle, if we all of a sudden went from a small team to, say, 50 people with the same objective? What types of things do you think would change in the team as it grew?
Definitely coming to an outcome wouldn't be as quick. I think as larger teams build out, it might be more of a case of factions building with opinions, and that's going to slow down how you operate. If there's any existing processes, like, for instance, we probably wouldn't be able to run a sprint or run the way we work anymore because it just wouldn't be feasible. So I think if you're throwing more people at that, you would need to evaluate definitely how the team operates on a day-to-day basis.
Sure. And Bridget and Merlin, do you have any comments on building close relationships with teams, the upsides and downsides?
I think that's a really good question, actually, that you asked, and I think something to emphasize in this is the importance of social relationships in particular groups. There's some phenomena that are quite interesting. One is that I remember when I was in business school, professors love mixing it up, quote unquote, and a lot of that is primarily we'll take people from here and people from there, and everyone really liked working within the groups they've already established. And that's just because you know each other, you trust each other, you understand how each other work, and you're quite effective and efficient in actually doing assignments, for example, in that case. And that translates quite well in the work setting also. So I'm not a big fan of mixing things up when it comes to forming groups. The other thing, too, is that social relationships within groups are really important because, in essence, you're there in the business of helping each other solve a problem. Now, if you really want to hit home on the idea of the importance of social relationships or having a prior experience working together, look at if, for example, if you were sick and you needed a surgery. Do you want a surgeon who has never operated in a hospital, doesn't really know the nursing team, doesn't know the specialists and the anesthesiologist, or do you want someone who's been there for, let's say, 15 years, who knows everyone and everyone knows how they operate? And that's no different than, let's say, in the case of in Tanda working and forming teams and projects that you guys are involved in. So I think there's that social relationship that's really quite vital, to be honest.
Right, so I think Merlin's hit a good point there about better outcomes come from having better relationships with people, and mixing those teams up can be difficult. Maybe someone else would like to comment on, when you work in a close team and you're tightly knit together, you work together, you might go out on the weekends together, you might eat breakfast and lunch together because you become such good friends. What happens when the business need changes in a way that a new person or a new skill needs to be added into that small team or that large team? How do you make sure that person can come and feel welcome in what might be quite a cliquey environment because everyone gets along so well?
We just had that in the growth team. So we started out as a team of 3, and then we had just had Jun join the team. And that, from like a skills perspective, was exactly what we needed. It was the gap in that. I think we remained being ourselves as a team. We didn't change in any way, and because we have these, we can have a beer on Friday outside of the team itself with Jun, which we'd done plenty of times before, or just talking, spending time to go to lunch together and doing those sorts of things. It helped to, I guess, him feel more comfortable operating in being a part of the growth team.
I feel like Tanda has a really good way of making people feel comfortable when they do join the team. So I know, for example, like when I started, it's always overwhelming when you start a new job. You don't know anybody, and trying to form those friendships, I think, just takes time. But I feel like we've got a pretty good sort of way of managing that, like by doing lunches, doing after-work drinks, trying to get everybody involved. So we are all friends.
Fantastic. Good. Okay, so we've spoken about all the good things of being in small and large teams, or small teams mostly. We had a question come in from the audience from Haley, and it says, how do you manage conflicts within small teams? So we're talking about when everything's going really well so far. All of a sudden, someone gets in a strop, maybe they're having a bad time at home, they come to work grumpy, or whatever it might be. How do you manage that? How do you manage that conflict when you're all so close? It's a hard question.
Yeah, that's a good question. I feel because we are so close and we do have the small teams, it's easier for you to be able to sort of approach that person and help them if they do need help. I feel in a larger team environment, it could potentially go unnoticed just because you're essentially with more people. Maybe you're just not taking much notice of the other people in the team. With the smaller one, you can kind of feel the effect if somebody is in a bad mood or upset, more so than in a large team.
Absolutely. Okay, so we got a few here, so I'm just going to pick them out. Dominique's asked, how can we keep teams aligned when each team has a different daily objective? I know we do this at Tanda with our 3 Horizons model. Maybe one of you two would like to talk about something like that, but do you have any thoughts firstly, Merlin?
Yeah, I think one an important element, sort of from an organizational level, I think, is this need within organizations to connect staff and connect teams and cascade information. Certainly from previous experience where I've ended up heading up divisions where there's incredible silos within service functions. You see one of the outcomes of these silos is that you see a lot of mistakes that happen. And primarily just because the information that technically different silos need in order to operate isn't sort of spread through the organization. As a result, everyone's working within their own set view, and invariably, mistakes happen out of that. And the idea of cascading and connecting teams and staff, it's not, again, there's no real, when you're dealing with organizations, there's really no one-stop shop type approach to it. I mean, you've got various avenues of doing it where you have, one-to-many models, one-to-one models, or even many-to-one type models. But how you actually engender that, that's really up to whoever that's sort of running the show. But yeah, that's me.
I think an example of that at Tanda is, like you're saying, with the 3 horizons model that we use. One of our ones is to have a focus on building a mobile-first product. And because in the development team we have multiple teams, like the growth team, the mobile team, the enterprise team, something like we, as the growth team, have different metrics to the mobile team. They're trying to create the best mobile product, build features that managers and employees want to use. We're helping prospective customers come on and see the value in Tanda itself. But we're always moving towards everything we build has a mobile focus. So then, even though they're not the two main metrics of the team don't align, that overarching goal of, okay, we need to think about how important it is to get it onto a mobile device shines through with all the work that we do.
Excellent. Okay, we've got a few more coming through here. I think a couple of questions have touched on this theme of what is the organizational overhead of having smaller teams. So when you're working in a smaller team, does that mean that you need more managers in teams, or does it mean you sort of need less and the team is more empowered? Who wants to touch on that? And maybe Merlin, you want to talk about that in different organizations apart from Tanda?
I think in the smaller team, I would say, we probably wouldn't require as much management. I think in the smaller team, you're able to, I'm not sure how to word this, but be able to work well with them because it is a small team. So essentially with that, you could, you don't have to go to a management. You can kind of have that, in the one, sorry, I'm just screwing up there. So.
Sorry, anyone else?
I think you're more empowered to make those decisions that maybe management would make by yourself. You're filling those gaps. So the autonomy comes with the responsibility, of course. So if you enjoy making those decisions or you're faced with them, you shouldn't be afraid to do so. That's part of being in a small team.
Now, for me, if you go back to the beginning of our session today, my main interest is creating organizations where they can operate without being constantly monitored, right? Where people are free enough to sort of do the right thing when no one is watching, and that's also a mindset issue. So ultimately, part and parcel with that for me is sort of having smaller teams. So to answer that question, you'd have less management and less oversight. And part of the reason why you would do that within organizations that grow is that if you're a manager, and your organization is growing 20-fold, there's no way that you can look over the shoulder of every single staff member and make sure that they're doing the right thing. That's resource intensive, and honestly, when you're trying to generate value for your organization, and you've got investors that you need to sort of pacify and keep happy, watching over, let's say, 100 staff members is counterproductive.
Sure. So at the moment, we're just 4 people in tech and innovation sitting on a stage at the Gold Coast Exhibition Centre. How do you think, is this stuff relevant in the real world? So when you go out to let's pick a sandwich store across the road, can you take these principles of small teams and empowering the teams and can you apply them in the real world, do you think?
I definitely think so. I think it gives the ability for people who are natural born leaders to shine and to step up and make calls that they may have not otherwise been able to do in an environment where there's like too much hierarchy. So, we being in the tech, leading these kind of ideas of how teams are run. If that was replicated elsewhere, I'm sure we'd see some pretty cool innovation in other industries as well.
Sure. So let's talk about some of the challenges people are going to have if they want to move to that model then. So it might be difficult for a business owner to step back and be like, okay, I've got a really good team, we're going to empower them. Maybe we'd like to talk about some of the counterintuitive elements you might have come across in your team when you've come in and you've wanted to make a decision. Perhaps when you first started, you thought you had to ask someone and you found out you didn't have to ask someone. What was that like as an experience?
Definitely daunting at first, because coming in, the first sort of job I walked into before, I was saying, as a sales consultant in a big telco, you kind of need to, you are searching for that approval that is this the okay thing to do. So at first you're quite scared. Well, I was personally, but then going forward and doing it the first time, realizing, okay, it's not actually that bad. You can course correct if you need to. Becoming more decisive just helps you in other facets of life as well.
Sure. Okay. Well, let's talk about technology. So in teams and Merlin, maybe in some larger organizations, can we talk about some technology we might use to communicate in our teams? What do we use and what can we recommend? Okay. Merlin, you first. Okay.
Well, what we've found is actually stepping back away from tools and just being in close and having stand-ups each day has really, really helped. That has allowed us just to not get caught up in being incorrect in our communication and just really being decisive really quick about how we get things across. We also just use like the sprint process I used earlier is a really good way to get everyone's thoughts out. And having those being able to document them also, I think, help with understanding what other people are thinking and may not actually be able to articulate if they were speaking it as well.
Sure. So, and just for some context, I mean, we recently moved over our internal communication tool. We moved to Workplace by Facebook. Before that, we were using a chat tool. I won't say which one, but we moved off of it. Bridget, perhaps you'd like to talk about when we were using that tool, what it was like, and perhaps some of the bad things that happened as the team grew and probably forced us to move off of that.
Yes, the tool that we were using, I found that the worst sort of thing that would happen would be like messages would go unnoticed. I feel, as you can understand, they would just come through and people kind of, for example, like when sales would put like a deal that they've closed, people would not be so quick to take the deal, just saying that they didn't have time to check the tool, that they didn't see it or something like that. Now that we have moved to a workplace, it's way easier. Obviously, everybody uses Facebook, so being able to create like separate groups, closed groups, open groups, you can I think assign yourself to groups and stuff like that, and like the chat function on that is really good too.
Yeah, right. So for us, what happened as an organisation, we started using this tool when we probably had 5 employees. And then when we tipped up to 100, it didn't work. So what happened is, when you think about communication lines in an organisation, say you've got 10 people, and then you add 1 extra person, well, you don't add 1 more communication line, you add 11 times 10 times 9 times 8, so on. You add all these new communication lines every time you do it. So I think what that creates, it creates bureaucracy, right? So I want to talk a little bit then touching on how do you think you keep communication lines open between different teams to prevent that bureaucracy from coming without getting too structural and you're up and down. And also, Kelvin, maybe talk a little bit about how in your team you're also working with an overseas team. So that probably is more naturally more hierarchical in its nature.
Yeah, so we work closely with our Manila office there in terms of the sales team and the marketing team who have a US focus. And we've been finding that at first, it is a challenge when you are separated by geography. Using something like Workplace by Facebook and just having a quick video call and getting on that sort of chat is much better than just back and forth on email and things. So the fact that we now have the ability to do that is come leaps and bounds. It's really also made it apparent that you need to be concise and really clear about how you talk about these things, because you can't just turn around like, say, we do in our team where we're in the same spot and talk to someone about it. You really need to, it just puts an emphasis on being clear.
Yep. Is there anyone else have anything to add?
Yeah, look, I guess for me it's an interesting one because I don't like tools, and you know I'm based in Canberra and all my business is spread across the country, and invariably when I have to do deals, I mean at the end of the day I generally have to jump on a plane and press the flesh, compounded by the fact also you know coming from a background where I was a programmer, I don't like telephones, which makes it interesting also. But look, I mean, invariably, when you look at the technology side of it, I mean, I'm a big fan of Basecamp. I think probably more so because I got caught up with the ethos of the founders of Basecamp. But I like sort of leaving email and having sort of a place where all my communications come in on one platform. That makes it easy also for me because as I'm sort of managing multiple projects at once, I mean, I can segregate that space out for myself. You know, 9.9 out of 10 times, I never do a deal or I can never seal a deal unless I'm actually there present with people. So it's always really interesting when I get phone calls and you know someone's actually located in the same city as me and they want a phone meeting. And I go, where you at? And they're like, oh, well, I'm in Canberra. I'm like, oh, let's meet, you know. And they don't understand why I'm so excited to meet, just because I'm just so malnourished with regards to actually having face-to-face meetings. And yeah, I might look a little bit bizarre that way when I'm on the phone talking to them, trying to line up that meeting. But look, I think it's really sort of, you know, for me, I guess it's different from, let's say, you guys here in that I'm sort of, you know, I'm a team of one, sort of having to manage different external teams in order to deliver programs and projects, and in many cases also that's sort of relying on how a lot of my partners and my sponsors really want to interact internally. I mean, there are several different platforms that they use. I'm not on any of them. A little bit of a maverick that way. But that's just how I operate. I mean, there's just less cognitive load for me to sort of work on all the multiple platforms. So yeah.
So talking about that adversity to tools, my phone has dropped off the Wi-Fi. So if anyone's put any questions in the last couple of minutes, I haven't received them. So, but we've got a couple of minutes left, so we're just going to wrap up. I think a fun thing to end on might be working in teams. Can you share some experiences of excellent or good team building exercises you've been part of? So what have you done to get a team together and build that rapport and relationship quickly?
Definitely one of the things that we did as a team was we went to the Manila office together. Hadn't really worked together before. It was very fresh. Being in a new environment, thrust in a new environment like that was a really good way to get on, build a personal relationship with the other co-workers, and you know, you're learning all these things together. So you're in a foreign environment, and I think you're both growing, or you're all growing together because you're understanding, learning these things, how it works, how the workplace works, how the country operates. So that, I think, really helped us as a team build our relationships really quickly, which we need to do, and it's really shone through with all how we operate now.
Sure. Okay, fantastic, guys. I think we're running out of time. We're out.